So I was going to make this video about Brevin Jordan, because my patrons hate me, and I've run out of tight end, of running backs and wide receivers they've asked me to do videos on, and they know I hate tight ends, so now I've just got a whole list of tight ends they want me to review. It's actually probably not, because they hate me. I doubt they're paying, whatever it is, $1 a month just for extra ways to make my life a little bit more miserable, but they know I hate prospecting rookie tight ends. And I got a whole bunch of them to get through. So we're going to look at Brevin Jordan in this video. That's the intro. But then I got into an argument about teammate adjustments on Twitter. And now it's really late, so I forget what I was going to say. So I guess we'll wing it? Yeah, winging it. Winging it seems very much my style. If you're new, because I've been told to start assuming everyone coming to my videos on YouTube are new and don't know who I am. I'm a big deal. Not really. But I typically do most of my content through Dynasty League Football. That's where my articles go. I've got a Patreon account where I post various articles, and also my very, very free, don't even track clicks, don't worry, you're not giving me nothing. I'm just giving you free stats because I like playing with other people. So it helps if everyone knows the stuff so we can argue about it. And that's normally, unless I forget to put the link in, it's in the video description. It's hosted on Patreon, but it just clicks straight through to a Google Sheet. Make sure you check the source tab on that, because wizards help me put it together. I'm just offering the free labor of doing it, which means we don't have to have 50 tabs open, and I'm calculating several things. Not everyone knows how to calculate, but we reference pretty often, like College Dominator. But if you're interested in those calculations, there's also a formula and results tab in there that literally tells you how to do it. So there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff in there, and it's growing as those wizards help me out, and patrons encourage me to add extra things that people are interested in seeing. And I don't know why I'm doing a review of the database right now. I have other videos for that. Go check them out. Where was I? Brevin Jordan. So what this video is a series that I'm doing this off season for the first time. I'm new to YouTube. That's the way I started this, right? It's really disjointed so far, don't you think, new guy? Yeah. I should probably stick to a format, so let's pick one. I'm doing rookie evaluations for the 2021 class. I'm used to writing these up in very boring nerd-like articles, obviously, or arguing about them with people on podcasts, but I've recently come over to YouTube, and that's why my structure is all a little loosey-goosey, because I'm very much an ad hoc talker. I just kind of like the conversation, so I'm not very structured when I get to talking, but some people seem to find it fun, so hopefully you will too, new guy. Hey, new guy. Click subscribe. I don't care. It's fine. It'll be great, but it's fine. So, what structure should we pick? These are pretty much first look, how I break down individual positions by looking at a specific player one of my patrons is interested in, looking through some of the first stats I look at and why I look at them and what I think it says. And essentially, I've got in my head, it's a 3-tier process. I look at the player's overall production, and then I see how that compares to players on his same team, in that same conference, and compared to past successful players in the NFL, while dropping knowledge bombs. Not really knowledge bombs, but interesting things I've picked up while doing this nerdy type nerd work over the last 3-4 years doing fantasy football, just trying to get better at it. So, to underline this, just to point it out to you, I'm not a statistician. I'm not a freaking analytics genius, or even an analyst, whatever that word means. I'm just a guy who plays fantasy football a lot and is constantly trying to get better because I want to make fun of my friends when I win. That's it. I think that's most of us, and so if you want in, come help out. Let's try and own our friends. That's basically the whole goal here. So I'm not a statistician, but I have learnt as much as I can to try to understand it. And I'm going to tell you what I've learned. You should always feel free to disagree. If I have a good trait, it's that I am remarkably difficult to offend. Doesn't sound like a good trait, but it means we can argue for fun about a thing that doesn't matter. And you can get, you're stupid for not liking this player, and you won't hurt my feelings. It's good. It's fine. It's football. It's fantasy football. We're not even playing real football. We're playing fake football, and it's just for fun. So that's my position. That's who I am. How about we do it? So we're going to break down his production, and then I'm going to talk more broadly about the tight end position, the difficulties, challenges of it, and what I think I've learned, specifically about rookies and how to and how not to draft them. And that's where we'll get to why my patrons hate me for making me look at a tight end. So, can we please get off this big screen? Because I really hate where I'm not screen friendly. I get it. All right, so Brevin Jordan. tight end from, where's he from? Actually, didn't even look to start with. He's from Miami, Florida. Okay, so interesting fact, that's where Jimmy Graham played his one season before he went to college, and here we're already dropping knowledge bombs about tight ends and how they're difficult to prospect. In fact, I actually recently wrote a chapter for a nerd book for Jordan McNamara, if you're aware of him. He writes the Analytics of Dynasty series, and he was producing a new one, and he asked me to write a chapter about this, essentially, what stats are useful for what while prospecting different positions. And one thing you should know about the tight end position, it's almost custom made to be resilient to profiling, or gaining an edge to know who is good and who is bad, is another way of saying that in a non-nerd-like fashion. Why? Because most good tight ends don't play a full college career. And by good, I mean those that we want in fantasy. I'm talking about Antonio Gates, I'm talking about Jimmy Graham, Rob Gronkowski, Travis Kelce. Most don't play 3 years from the age of 18 to 20, and compete with their teammates for opportunity and produce certain stats. That's not the typical path of most players who go on to be good. Now, some did, like Gronkowski, I think, have played several seasons. Travis Kelce played a remarkably normal-looking college career. It looks like a wide receiver's career. He played multiple years, slowly grew into his role, was efficient with it. Great. Most actually look like Jimmy Graham. He plays 1 year, kind of okay, at an older age. Then he goes on to the NFL and becomes one of the most dominant tight ends we've seen in recent era. Like, there's not much to do with your sample when most good players don't play a lot in college for one reason or another. With Jimmy, he just basically converted from basketball, probably, to a football player that 1 year and then got drafted into the NFL. And so we didn't see development. We don't know how to compare that really very, very well to past prospects. So because of the nature of the tight end position, and the fact most don't play out full college seasons, they can be difficult to prospect for that reason. The other reason is, and I realized I said I was going to do Brevin Jordan and then do this bit, but we're doing it, so let's go. The other part is, so few tight ends are actually fantasy good. Not good in the NFL. There are so many good players in the NFL. It's not even funny on different scales. But we're talking about the players who make a difference to us in fantasy football, which means Rob Gronkowski, Jimmy Graham, that's about it, right? Travis Kelce, Darren Waller a couple of times now, kinda, sorta, maybe. Mark Andrews that 1 year. Hunter Henry for a start of his rookie. There's relatively few. So we have a relatively small sample size to compare to college players, and relatively few college players go on to do well, and relatively few teams play more than one tight end at a time that has any kind of fantasy significance, either in college or in the NFL. And so we have this small sample size problem with a relative lack of actual data to use to compare, because most of them don't play college seasons. Like I say, it's basically custom made to be resilient to any kind of analysis. But there are things that I can tell you. For example, when looking at college stats for tight ends, the best year to look at, if you're looking at one stat, say it's dominator rating, or yards per team pass attempt, which is one of my new favorites when trying to prospect rookies going to the NFL, because it's a really good stat, basically. Has good correlation to production in the NFL compared to most other stats. But ignoring that, essentially, you could look at, what did they do when they were 18, or you could look at what did they do when they were 19, or you could look at what they did in their first year, or their last year, or their best year, or the average. So which year are we meant to be looking at? That's the first question that we should have a basic understanding of before we go look at players. Now, all my results, my testing results, are also in the database, by the way, and we'll do a little bit of that, but ignoring that for now. For tight end specifically, the specific type of year that I get the best results for is looking at the very last year they play before they go into the NFL. Now, this is actually different to running back and wide receiver and also quarterback, but we're talking about tight end right now, so we're going to stick with that. So what you want to do is look at whatever stats you are interested in, or film for that matter, but specifically in their last year, because that tends to have the best correlation or connection to production in the NFL. So whatever they did in their last year, not their best year, the average, their first, or any particular age season, the very last year tends to be the best season to use to judge them. Now, hopefully you look at all of it, but if you're just going to look at one, the last year is the thing to look at. Alright, so we're interested in Brevin Jordan. We already know, because I just went through that light speed, so we're really interested in what he did in this last year. But since I already mentioned I like to look at all of it, we're going to look at more than just his last year. So what stats are we going to look at? Alright, let's do a little bit of this, and it's what I did in my last video with Michael Carter. Hey, I'm small now, and I like it better that way. Anyway, if you go to my Formulas and Results tab, you can sort by the correlation of individual stats by each position to actual points over the first 3 years in the NFL. Now, something to know about tight end, where it's resilient to prospecting of all different sorts, is that tight ends tend to break out in their second year. That's the most common breakout year. But I think RotoViz has got that slightly wrong, because when I look at it, lots of tight ends break out consistently after their third year, in a different way than wide receivers and running backs, to the point that like 80% of wide receiver and running back breakouts have happened by year 3. That's basically all of them, and most that break out after that don't do particularly much but break out and then fade into obscurity. With tight ends, they tend to break out after that second year, after that third year, in significant volume, and the percentages don't drop off a cliff in the same way that running back and wide receivers do. In other words, more breakouts are coming, and so that average of the first 3 years is relatively hard to trust, because pretty much the average of tight ends of Gronkowski, of Jimmy Graham, of whoever you actually want to target, is actually going to be a lot lower than we are typically used to searching for. So the average points per game thing is a little suspect here compared to other positions. That's the first thing to note. Second thing to know is, if you do sort by the average points per game, because what we're interested in is points, and then sort by tight end position, and then scroll down, you can essentially see which stats have the highest connection to, or the highest explanation of variance, is a nerdy way of saying it, production in the NFL over the first 3 years. Now, if you sort tight ends that have been drafted into the NFL by that stat, you'll come up with a pretty good list of tight ends we wanted to target in our rookie drafts, if we were to do such a thing. I don't think you should, but there you go. And so essentially what we're looking at here is a list of the best stats if we're just going to look at individual stats to look at. And what you'll see, if you get past draft capital and my models, because just, I'm a moron. You don't want to trust my models any more than I do. And so if we just want to look at individual stats, the stats that come up with the highest correlation, last year, told you, yards per team attempt, last year yards per team pass attempt, last year market share of receiving yards, which is a fancy way of saying percentage of receiving yards. Also this sex score, but we're going to ignore it for right now for reasons we'll talk about another time. Very few tight ends actually look good with sex score, and that name is taboo because Zach Reed thought it would be funny, and I like doing what Zach Reed tells me from the Dynasty Dummy podcast, but let's ignore that. And the next one that I want to point out to you that has a pretty good correlation to success, it was right here. Did it move? No, the one I like to look at is efficiency score for tight ends specifically, which is yards per team pass attempt over conference average in their final year. So, you could look at as many of them as you want, but here we've got 3 stats that are at the top of the list, so let's just look at those 3 for Brevin Jordan, right? That seems like a good idea, right? Okay, so, Brevin Jordan, where are you? So he's coming from Miami, Florida. Other things I know about Miami, Florida. Ooh, what? There's his name again. David Njoku, Clive Walford, and also Chris Herndon. Interesting tight ends all in their own right come from Miami, Florida. Now, something I don't understand about this draft class of tight ends is they profile significantly better than last year's class, even though we saw some interesting production for some of those lower drafted tight ends last year. My typical rule is trade for last year's tight ends, by the way, which is where we're spiraling towards at the end of this video. But Kyle Pitts is just unanimously seen as the best prospect in this class, although maybe slightly small in the weight department. He's got the height, not necessarily the weight. And probably his best comparison that's most often going to be drawn up is Evan Ingram, who also hit in year 1, and he's pretty much the only tight end ever, or at least in the last 4, 5, 8 years or so, to actually have fantasy significant production in his first year. So Kyle Pitts, despite being unanimously the best tight end in this class in terms of production, has a limited chance of actually paying off in year 1. That'll cycle back towards at the end of the video as well. So, here's a weird thing. I don't know why Brevin Jordan is thought of as much less of a producer than Kyle Pitts. That wasn't a joke. He didn't produce that. They produce kind of similarly. There's actually 3 or 4 tight ends in this class who are all pretty decent producers, in fact very high producers considering the position they were playing from different conferences. And you can see them all at the top of the list here, organized by my pre-draft score. Like, Brevin Jordan was pretty much as productive as Kyle Pitts. And everything that I've read on it is like, Brevin Jordan might be a good receiver, but he's a better blocker. If he's a better blocker, and you think he's less of a producer, then you should just probably like Brevin Jordan, because he wasn't less of a producer than Kyle Pitts. What do I mean? Well, he has smaller numbers, and Kyle Pitts is, for me, too. He's ranked tight end 1. He's very clearly the best, most productive tight end in this class. I think he should be the first tight end off the board in rookie drafts, but here's the thing. His numbers are shorter, but he's playing in a different conference, in a different team that produces different kinds of volume, and when you adjust for that, he kind of was just as productive as Kyle Pitts. So what do I mean by that? Let's look at just a basic stat that everyone's comfortable with. Okay, so Kyle Pitts had over 600 yards and over 700 yards in the 2 years that he played over 6 games, as you can see in the database right here, 649 and 770 yards when he was 19 and when he was 20. Now, unfortunately, age doesn't do a lot for us for the tight end position, unlike the wide receiver position, but those are pretty good ages to be a producer, no matter what the position, so it's fine. Brevin Jordan has lower numbers, obviously. He played 3 full years, 287 yards, 495 yards, and 576. That doesn't sound like a lot less than Pitts, but for a tight end, an extra 200 yards is incredibly significant since they're both playing pretty much full seasons. Now, Brevin Jordan's playing 8 and 9 games because they're not going to bowl games and stuff, and Kyle Pitts gets up there to 11 and 13 games, but those bowl game stats aren't included in this overall number here, so you don't have to worry about it too much. So 200 yards is significant, but he's playing in the ACC. Well, Brevin Jordan's playing in the ACC, and Kyle Pitts is playing in the SEC West. Those are two different usage patterns with two different typical level of volumes. So what am I talking about? All right, simple way of looking at it. If I go and look at this by year and say, oh, that's part of the conversation I was having on Twitter. But where were we? SEC. What did we see? Kyle Pitts is? No. I can't maneuver my own database. Look at this. Yeah, he plays in the SEC West, right? And we sort by tight ends. So this is all tight ends since 2000 in the SEC West. And we just scan over to something simple that we all understand, which is just PPR points per game. So who had the best points per game season in the SEC West ever, basically, since 2000? Oh, look, it's Kyle Pitts in his final year. Yeah, he was very productive. Again, he's unanimously at the top of this class. But what if we scoot over to, and you can already see where this is going. This is probably too corny at this point, but Brevin Jordan, ACC Coastal. By year. So let's go and look at the ACC Coastal. 4 tight ends, and see who had the best points per game season pretty much ever, or at least since 2000. I don't know, because Brevin Jordan, in his last year. Relative to his conference, Brevin Jordan was as impressive as a producer at the tight end position as Kyle Pitts was once you consider conference. Did I just blow your mind? I shouldn't have. That's a really basic, simple thing. I'm surprised no one's mentioned. No, seriously, anyone who's talking about Brevin Jordan as a lower producer than Kyle Pitts did not go look. Now, I hate to throw shade at all the people that make money doing this, but there's no way of looking at their stats, even with a basic moron understanding. Like, I get it, I'm not a statistician, but, like, compared to where they were playing, Brevin Jordan was incredibly productive for a tight end, and so was Kyle Pitts. Now, Kyle Pitts was more productive and should be the one, but Brevin Jordan was within range, right? He was just as impressive where he was playing. Now, that's not to say Brevin Jordan's an all-star prospect, because, honestly, none of these guys are. Now, they're scoring pretty well, but they're not. Again, where tight end prospecting is a little more tricky, it's hard to say, like, these are guys you should draft in the first round. Like, I would almost never say that about a tight end. But if we go and look at tight ends in the ACC Coastal, or let's actually just go look at his team, because we already know a few good players came from there. So, Miami, Florida. And let's look them up. There are several players that stand out in the history of Miami, Florida, at the tight end position, and let's include Brevin Jordan in it. Go take a look at Chris Herndon, who I maintain had one of the most impressive rookie seasons, especially for someone that was low drafted in fantasy and low drafted in the NFL. But obviously it hasn't paid off. Opportunities, everything. He might have lost that window of opportunity. Clive Warford is an interesting comparison as well, because some people liked him. We've got Greg Olsen coming from Florida, actually, Jimmy Graham, and where's David Njoku? He came from here too. Yeah, I got him selected. All right. Let's organize it by year and go take a look at how productive they were. Now, Brevin Jordan isn't the most productive player. I would say he compares very well to David Njoku, actually. Let's actually, now I think about it, this add hot thing isn't working for me at all. Yeah, if you go compare rushing stats, receiving stats, there it is, and David Njoku to Brevin Jordan, what you'll find is that Brevin Jordan's heights easily represent the same heights of David Njoku. So why was everyone much more hyped up about the receiving prowess of David Njoku compared to Brevin Jordan? Honestly, the combine. Brevin Jordan isn't going to get the benefit of that. I think the Pro Day is scheduled for March 29th. And, relatively few players ever tested like David Njoku tested. To be fair, he's an athletic marvel. But I think Brevin Jordan's going to test decently. As someone who doesn't watch film, I don't have much of an opinion on that, but I can't imagine a player being this productive for his team at the tight end position, because it's relatively rare. Again, you can go and compare him to past prospects, and those names I mentioned are really the only ones that stand out for Florida in a 20-year history. Not everyone hits even these 24% heights. But, again, David Njoku's last season, he had a 24% dominator. Brevin Jordan's last year, 24% dominator. The hype is not there for Brevin Jordan. I think the difference is that combine data for David Njoku really put him over the edge. But I think anyone describing Brevin Jordan as underproductive is not looking. He was very productive, especially once you take his conference into consideration. And when you look at past players from this team who have been good or have had good draft capital, because David Njoku's never really paid off, he's easily been their equal at their heights. And in fact, what you'll notice is Brevin Jordan was a larger part of the team for 3 straight years than David Njoku ever was before that final year. Only having one good year for a tight end normally isn't a red flag, but I guess we can pretend it's a red flag because it's David Njoku and he didn't work out. And if we can go and compare him to someone else who actually did succeed, again from the same team, I haven't fact-checked this one, but Greg Olsen, let's see what he did. Yeah, Greg Olsen played 2 full years, 11 games each season in 2005-2006 from Miami, Florida. The highest dominator rating he ever had was 18%. Now, that's a different era, different time, different kind of averages. Brevin Jordan compares pretty well to good players who have come from this situation. I would say he's a remarkably interesting prospect in terms of production. Now, that's not to say what he's doing on his tape, what his actual skill set is, and we still need to know where he's going to be drafted and what team he's going to go to, because opportunity is king. But in terms of production, Brevin Jordan is as good a prospect as any you've been excited to draft since ever? I mean, I don't get what I'm reading. Like, I get that Kyle Pitts is more productive, but he's in a more pass-friendly conference that tends to give more opportunity and production to tight ends anyway. And once you take that away, Brevin Jordan is his equal in production. I mean, there's no way of not saying that. I don't get why he's the blocking tight end. He was an incredibly good receiver. So yeah, that's my Brevin Jordan weirdness. I don't think people are actually taking the time to go look. I think they know Kyle Pitts is the receiver and Brevin Jordan isn't. And the other players in this class aren't nearly as productive. But Brevin Jordan is easily as productive as Kyle Pitts. Like, pretty easy to say that with a straight face. And you can... 200 yards makes a difference, and so does, they have fairly similar percentages, though. And their yard per team pass attempt is fairly similar. Like, they were efficient on their given roles. Like, Kyle Pitts has 26% of the receiving touchdowns his final year. Brevin Jordan has 29%. Kyle Pitts accounted for 17% of the team's receiving yards in his last year. Brevin Jordan accounted for 20%. There is an argument to say that Brevin Jordan was playing a larger role for his team than Kyle Pitts ever was for his. That would equate to being more productive, by the way. I'm not going to say that, but I think I might say that. Not yet. Not right now. I want to dig in a little more, but I don't get it. Another stat that might do a good comparison for you here, Kyle Pitts, on average for his entire career, gets 4.6 receptions per game, which is actually a pretty decent average for a tight end. Again, you can see the average for top 12 producers at the very top of the screen here. Most that go on to have at least one top 12 season in the NFL, the average of receptions per game is around 3.1. It's not particularly high compared to wide receivers, right? But both Pitts and Jordan are over 4. Now, that 4.6 compared to 4.0 is significant. Again, Kyle Pitts was more of a receiver, granted. But Brevin Jordan's playing in the ACC Coastal for Miami, Florida, and he's not getting that less of receiving work in a conference on a team that typically gives lower receiving work or finds tight ends that have low receiving work. And when you look at his stats in that situation, Brevin Jordan compares to the good players on that team, not the ones that no one's ever heard of because they weren't good in the NFL. Even Clive Walford had some sort of significance in the NFL, if memory serves, and Brevin Jordan was more productive than him from that same team. Now, college teams change so often year over year that we're not comparing apples to apples here. And it's not that I'm making team adjustments. I'm not making any adjustments. I'm saying when you compare them where they were playing, Brevin Jordan was very productive. He's a very interesting prospect. And there's really no way of breaking down his production that does not say that. So if you have been given the impression that Kyle Pitts was a productive receiver, Brevin Jordan's wasn't, that's wrong. Brevin Jordan was a very productive receiver. Not as productive as Kyle Pitts, although I think we can make the case. But at least they were both productive. They both tick that box very, very well. Alright, so why don't I draft rookie tight ends? Let's switch screens so it seems like a different thing. Hey. Why don't I draft tight ends? Literally one tight end has actually had fantasy-relevant production in his first year, pretty much ever. If we go back far enough, I can find a few others. But yeah, and that's Evan Ingram, whose value also dropped immediately after he got injured, and then he had a down season, and then 2020 happened, and now he's cheaper than any rookie tight end you might be considering drafting right now. Also, Hunter Henry had a good rookie season. Same story. Well, almost same story. He didn't hit quite as hard as rookie year. So, I don't understand what the proposition of drafting a tight end high is. Because if it's a points bet, you're pretty much betting on a once in a 20-year event that a tight end is going to give you points in their rookie season. Now, most rookies we don't draft to get points unless they're running backs. So it's more of a wide receiver bet, which is value. Okay. Well, wide receiver value typically increases year 1 to year 2 as long as wide receivers don't trip over their own feet when they get in. Now, using the 2020 draft class as a proposition, Jerry Jeudy and obviously Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb have also all increased in value. Denzel Mims, Jalen Reagor have basically had stable value. And you can already, since you play fantasy, hopefully if you're watching this we play fantasy, begin to get what I'm driving at here. Stable value is a value loss in terms of a rookie pick spent. It just is. Like Denzel Mims is harder to trade now than he was last year, even if his value in ADP and overall trade calculations says otherwise. He's just harder to get. People don't want to trade him at a loss, and they want more for him, but we just saw a bad rookie season, which is a bad indication that we should invest in them. So those who want to trade for him either have to pay more than they should, or they're not going to trade with you. So stable value is actually a value loss for a rookie. Tight ends tend to have stable value, not value increases year 1 to year 2. They lose value even if they maintain value, is basically what I'm telling you. Fant, Hawkinson, two most recent examples, I was saying trade for them last offseason, and they both hit pretty decently. Do you think their value's gone up significantly? Do you think you'll get a lot more for them this offseason than you would have last offseason? Because I doubt it. I think they've got stable value despite the fact they actually returned on investing on them by being the most likely players to break out in 2020, and they did. But they're not Jimmy Graham and Robert Gronkowski, at least yet, because those type of producers are incredibly rare at the tight end position. We typically only have one or two. Right now, we really only have one in Travis Kelce, and the tight end 2 and 3 being Darren Waller, and George Kittle was injured, to be fair. He might be another difference maker. And I don't even care who the third guy was. And Darren Waller wouldn't have been worth that investment. But I'm getting too much into trades here. Essentially, the problem with drafting a tight end in the first round is that there will probably be the same value next year, which actually means they're harder to trade for. So you'll either have to give up value or just hold on for points. So they're a bad value proposition. And they're very unlikely to give you points that are worth anything in their first year. So they're a bad points bet. Let me put this in some sort of context. Essentially, by drafting a tight end in the first round, you give up the chance to chase an Antonio Gibson or a Chase Claypool or a Jamar Jefferson or someone at the running back or wide receiver position who breaks out, adds further value to your team, and actually increases exponentially compared to tight ends in terms of value, Why? Because you'll be able to maintain the value of a first-round pick. That's why. So let me ask you a question. If you draft Kyle Pitts in the first round, how much extra would I have to pay you to have Kyle Pitts, given that he won't break out in his first year, to get Kyle Pitts off you if I miss with my own rookie pick? Is it a second-round pick? Is it a third-round pick? Do I basically give up a second or third-round pick for the chance to chase a running back and wide receiver with my own first-round pick, and then I just get to reset by trading for Kyle Pitts off you next year anyway? You're basically just carrying him for the year for me, and I get to chase wide receiver and running back, and I have to give you a second or third-round pick for the privilege. Yeah, I'm going to chase a wide receiver and running back. That's why I don't really care about rookie tight ends, because the value's pretty much going to be stable, and if I decide, I really wish I'd taken the tight end instead, I can get him for a second or third round pick added on top, which are just throwaway pieces anyway. So I'll do that. If I really want Kyle Pitts, I'll buy him from you next year. And now in your head, you're thinking, well, I won't sell him to you. But if you won't sell him to me, what you're basically saying is you're going to burn your value. Either Kyle Pitts breaks out, relatively rare, and even rarer that it's a player that actually makes a difference for your team, like a Kittle, like a Jimmy Graham, like a Robin Gronkowski, like that's a once-in-a-lifetime moon-type shot. George Kittle might be that guy. So you will stubbornly not trade him next year for the same value because you're hoping he's one of those guys. And he probably won't be, because most aren't. And if he is, well, you'll probably get the same points per game as I will have to settle for from a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh round pick, because that happens every year as well. I've got a graph that illustrates this somewhere. There. This is Travis Kelce in 2020. He's the only person since 2014 who's actually provided significant points per game above average for the tight end position, outside of those that we could have drafted all around here, and we did draft all around here, outside the first 100 picks in a startup draft. Like, I'm going to be chasing these guys if you don't trade from Kyle Pitts for me, given that he's going to be a breakout. So essentially, you're paying these prices in this red box for production I'm going to get in this big red circle just to be stubborn. The fact is, if you draft Kyle Pitts, you probably should trade him next year for the same value. But it will be equal value, which is a value you ask for a rookie. Or he's going to Evan Ingram. That's the bet. Now, do I want Kyle Pitts? Yes, I think he's the best tight end in this class, to be very clear. And there is a certain point where there are no running backs and no wide receivers I'd rather take the bet over. And that may well happen in the first round. We haven't seen the draft yet. But I think to go in blindly, thinking I can draft a tight end in the first round, you should know that you should really avoid that at all costs. Now, that doesn't mean you draft J.J. Arcega-Whiteside over Evan Ingram every chance you get, obviously, because then you have to go and pay a second round or third round pick to get Evan Ingram finally. And then his value declines, because that's normally what happens. John Reed rule. But it does mean you should be very cautious with the thought that I want to draft Kyle Pitts, because he's probably going to be a late first, even a mid-first round pick this year, because it's a relatively late class. And it's a low odds bet. We can make it if everyone that we like at running back and wide receiver has gone by that point, and given that we haven't seen the draft, that might be the case. But just know that you should generally try to avoid drafting first-round tight ends in rookie drafts. And I like Kyle Pitts a lot, and I don't want to not draft Evan Ingram, which is why I'm telling you you should if it's the right move. And I'm a big fan of rookie value, or being all about stand on your hill, go get your guy. Whether it's up, whether it's down, just go make your move. Don't worry about ADP, don't worry about where you could get him unless, you can draft him in the third round and you draft him in the first, and you're just being silly. But overall, that's how I play rookie drafts. And still, it's probably better to try and get Kyle Pitts next year. In the same way, it's probably better to try and get Harrison Bryant now. And he was very cheap last year. He wasn't even a first round pick. Or Albert O. All of them. Probably better to get them now, having tried to get the running backs, especially in the 2020 class. That was a heavy class. Anyway, that's why I typically don't like prospecting rookie tight ends because most of them are not going to be worth the investment. Now, Kyle Pitts was the first round pick. Brevin Jordan, I don't know yet. If the narratives that he's not a productive player drops into the third round pick, I'm probably going to end up with a lot of Brevin Jordan, to be honest. There's actually a few players in this class that would be worth drafting outside the first round for sure, and Brevin Jordan is one of them. So yeah, I better get out of here. I probably ran it about too much there. But yeah, I don't like rookie tight ends. I don't. Okay, I'm gone. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you didn't, let me know why, what I can do, what I can conclude, what I can shut up about, maybe, to make them better. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out if you did. Again, 35 minutes. We're never going to get to that 10-minute YouTube algorithm thing, but, you know, screw them if they can't take a joke, I guess. Yeah, keep grinding. Appreciate you, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye. Thanks.